Hey everybody, welcome back to the Noel Casler podcast. Broke out the dulcimer today. Was feeling in the mood for it. Crazy times, heavy times. It's supposed to be played sitting down, but that's podcast style dulcimer. Anyway, hope you guys are good. I know it's been a minute since I've done one of these. I've been writing, I've been putting stuff out there, but haven't sat down to talk to you guys in a minute, so let's do it. Heavy times. You know, I woke up today and was in complete shock like the rest of the world to hear what's happening in Israel. I got a lot of friends who live over there. I got a lot of friends here, that have a lot of relatives over there. I know people have worked on behalf of the Israeli government. It's such a tragic situation, and I don't even know if everybody is prepared for what, the next few weeks and months are going to bring. The suffering and the tragedy of this stuff is just immense, and a terrorist attack like that, because that's what it is. It's just, it's beyond the pale. And it comes at a time where it just feels like the world is being overwhelmed in every way, even environmentally, right? That's part of the reason I haven't done a podcast in a while. It's like, I don't want to just get on here and rant. I know that's basically what it is, but I'm not looking to bum anybody out. And, it's been pretty crazy, right? Just from an environmental standpoint, we'll obviously get into the geopolitical stuff, though I'm no expert. And, nobody is at this point, right? Nobody knows what's happening. Nobody knows why the intelligence failed so much on the Israeli side to not know that this is coming. But, it happens, right? We've been here before. Superpowers can get snuck up on, and even countries with incredible intelligence and technology and stuff like the Israelis have. Terror is terror. If somebody wants to hurt you, they can in this modern world. And violence is never a solution. Obviously you have to respond in a military way now, but it just breaks my heart. It's like what's the curse of the house of Atreus? Violence begets violence, and we're in such an unstable time already. First of all, I'm glad Joe Biden is president at this moment. Can we just get this out of the way right now? Like, thank God this didn't happen, while Trump was in office. And it also points to the time wasted when he was in office that I bring up often. The fact that we lost so much time in terms of human progress, intellectual progress as a nation, in terms of research and all this stuff. And they're still at it, right? They're trying to shut down the government every chance they get, right? We're without a speaker right now, second in line to the president at a time of global instability, thanks to the GOP chaos, right? But when, Trump controlled the White House and both houses of Congress, he wasn't trying to really bring about peace in the Mideast. He was trying to score political points. He was letting Jared and Steven Mnuchin make as much money as they could off the situation. That's what the Abraham Accords were about. That's what the last minute trips that Jared and Secretary Treasury Mnuchin took in the waning days of their in administration, right? Like when January 6th was happening, Jared was flying back from the Middle East, taking a shower and turning on the TV to see the horror that the rest of the world was facing. And of course, now he's nowhere to be found. He's spending the billions that he got from Saudi Arabia. And, the world's a mess. And Netanyahu's obviously a crook. And it complicates this situation so much. But no matter how you feel about the politics of Israel, the people don't deserve this, and the children living in Palestine don't deserve the war that their parents are bringing upon them. And it's just, it's just heartbreaking, and it's going to be a heavy time for the world, I fear. And so that's part of the reason I just wanted to check in and do this podcast. It's a rainy day here. We got some torrential floods last weekend in the New York area, and we're getting a little reboot of that this Saturday. I'm recording this. But That's part of what we're facing too. It's catastrophe. And we can't even deal with climate change in the proper way because there's so much political chaos and there's so much compromise in terms of like, don't go after Biden for this stuff because we got to get him back in office, which is very true, right? Biden can't just be like, I'm going to outlaw fossil fuels tomorrow, which is what I would do if I was president, by the way. So don't vote for me if you want to drive or use your lawnmower, because that shit is gone the moment I walk into the Oval Office. But, and I'm serious about that. But because that's what's going to stop this. And nobody wants to really talk about that. Everyone's like, yeah, climate change sucks, but, I forgot that quart of milk. I got to run back to the grocery store and I got to do it in my pickup truck. Not everybody's like that, but I don't see a lot of people trying to change their ways. Not That's not to say that people don't care, but in response to the enormity of the problem, we're sort of just kind of going about like life is normal, and I'm including myself in that. And I certainly I think about it all day long. But I still got lights on. I'm still doing a podcast right now. I'm using energy. But I'm trying to not use as many plastic products and single-use plastics and all these things that are byproducts of the oil and gas industry, like these wars, right? There's no geopolitical conflict in our world that doesn't involve economics and that doesn't involve the petrochemical oil and gas industry. And obviously the Mideast, you know, is a great example of that. Israel is sort of something different, right? But the money that was there that allowed Trump to sort of waste diplomatic time because he knew he could send Jared over there on the DL and cut some deals with the Saudis, who they're dying to get that Saudi money they were before he became president. All that stuff feeds into the instability, right? We saw that during the Gulf War, the last one and the first one, right? And no peace has come, right? And I think that's the horror. When I woke up this morning and saw the news, and this is sort of a constant theme in a lot of what I talk about and write about, but I was like, there's not going to be any peace in my lifetime, right? I'm 52. It's kind of like, hopefully I'll be here for another, 40, 50 years, but it's like, yeah, this mess isn't going to get straightened out in my lifetime. And I don't just mean what got started today. I mean the whole of it, Putin, Eastern Europe, Ukraine, the Republican Party. It's going to take generations to wash this chaos out of us. And it's going to go beyond politics. It's going to go beyond the left and right, because it's, we're at the level of like Dr. King and Gandhi and stuff. You need people to, Stephen Biko. You need people like to almost rise up in a spiritual way against this illness, this ego-based mind-made madness, if you will, of men seeking power, right? Because it's all about power and corruption. When you look at the motives on the right, when you look at the chaos that just went down on Capitol Hill, they fired McCarthy because he wasn't going to shut down the government, because Trump told him to shut down the government, right? Trump summoned Marjorie Taylor Greene up to Bedminster, and they ate halibut and drank Diet Coke, and Maggie Haberman sat in the corner with her pencil and wrote it all down. And this was in the New York Times, and Trump said, you got to shut it down. It's going to help my case. It's going to help the special counsel or hamstring the special counsel. So he thought. It wouldn't have mattered at all, but he thought it would help his case. So he ordered this little troll that nobody had ever heard of before a few years ago. She was living under a bridge in Georgia somewhere, and QAnon made her the candidate, chased out her opposition, and she ran unopposed and took her seat and became a celebrity in the Republican Party and beyond, right? Because every time I log on to Twitter, I see somebody retweeting Marjorie Taylor Greene, and people became stars by subtweeting her. That means getting in everyone's replies so other people see you serving it back to them, and you get a follow that way. It's kind of one of the little tricks people use to build up followings online. which is annoying. I used to do it to Trump. I stopped doing it when he left. But, that's what people do. A lot of the people you see fighting back are hoping to build up a big following that they can then make money off of, which is a whole nother issue, which disgusts me. And it's part of the reason I haven't been putting out as much content, because this isn't about the money. This isn't monetized. There's no sponsors of this podcast. There's no patron. There's no send me some money. You can sign up for the Substack. You'll get all the content free. You can support it for $12 a month. If you want to do that, it helps me do the podcast and everything else, and I appreciate it. But my end goal is not building a brand for Noel Casler, okay? And when I see so much information out there, I'm like, I don't need to put more noise out there, more content, because what happens is people keep, they make a buck off it, and there's this insatiable appetite for more and more and more. That's why you see on MSNBC, all they talk about now is Trump's legal trials, because they know it's a recipe for 2 years. It's real cheap to get a Zoom call with a former prosecutor and a lawyer and have somebody come in, and a socialite who's now a journalist can sit across from you and give you her opinions on Trump. And I saw an ad for a Stop Trump rally downtown, and Mary Trump's on it, and Michael Cohen, who still lives in Trump Park Avenue. It's like, where were these people in 2016? They weren't anywhere to be found. I'm no hero, but I walked away from my career because nobody else would break their NDAs who worked on Celebrity Apprentice, because they wanted to make a buck. And I saw people make a buck off of speaking out, and now they're now they got podcasts. People that were afraid to speak out against their own relative or their own boss 7 years ago now have podcasts and lead panel discussions and get paid, and there's celebrities in the anti-Trump movement. And I find it annoying as hell, because it's part of the big greedy attention economy grift that gave you Trump in the first place. And it's everywhere. And it's going to lead us to ruin if we don't get hip to it. And again, it's part of the reason I haven't done a podcast, because I know most of you guys probably like all those people, and I'm not dissing them. People got to make a living, and they get a little taste of celebrity and they want more. So everybody's got a podcast and a Substack, but not everybody's saying the truth. People are all repeating the same kind of stuff they heard somebody else say, and it's this economy based on clicks and rage farming and anger, and it's not healthy for anybody. And Trump knows that better than anybody else. That's why he's always played the media like a fiddle, right? Because he knows people are greedy. He knew NBC knew he wasn't a billionaire. When they started shooting The Apprentice, before the one I worked on, which is when the celebrities came in, the regular Apprentice, which was the first contract they gave him for a TV show, which Mark Burnett, by the way, wanted to do one on the Mir space station with Russian oligarchs and Putin, and they put him on to Trump, and that's how he ended up doing one on a billionaire here in New York. But when they first went to film that, my buddy was the audio guy, and when they walked into the office, all the furniture was threadbare and stuff. He didn't look like a billionaire, and they had to go rent furniture to make it look fancy. So the boardroom and all that stuff was all rented, or by the time I worked on the show, it was on a sound stage for the finale. We taped the first finale at 8H at SNL's studio. So the whole thing was a creation of TV, just like all reality show is. And, it's kind of with a wink and a nod. Everybody knows it's fake. And, in even Mark Burnett's defense, nobody knew the guy was going to become president. That would have been the farthest thing from the truth, right? But he knew nobody was going to look that hard at the fact that he wasn't a billionaire, and he would give out free hotel rooms to NBC execs during, during the sort of upfronts. Do you know what upfronts are? When a network sells its programming to advertisers, and it's a kind of behind the scenes thing, but it's big business. So I used to work on those for all the networks every year, because they'd make all the celebrities come in, and kiss ass to corporate types. And they were always a nightmare. And I did the Fox ones, which were completely insane. But anyway, and TBS, I would do Turner Networks, TNT, which was CNN. It's a TV show, right? It's entertainment, which is my point, right? And so is the online stuff, it's cool if you're consuming that and it makes you feel better and it keeps you up to date. I'm not trying to be judgmental about that. Well, what I'm trying, well, I guess I am a little bit. A little bit, it pisses me off. If you had power to do something about it at some point and you waited until you could make a buck off it, you're no hero or friend to democracy. That's just the way it goes. I'm doing this for the people who don't have a voice, for the women and children that are being demonized in this country right now for the simple fact of trying to come across the border and get a better life. I've never met a Latin person I didn't like. Never. I've never met one that wasn't hardworking. Every person I've ever interacted with who came from another country made it better in my eyes. And that's not to say there aren't bad apples. There's bad people everywhere, right? It's human nature. But the people that are coming here to work with their families deserve every opportunity to do that, and they deserve our sympathy and our help. Not our pity, but our help. We need what they have to offer, as I've said a million times on this show. So the people protesting that, as they were in Staten Island this week, they were showing up outside of a shelter, the Trump supporters and the MAGA guys, and they were blaring horns and blasting music and bright lights into this. It was like an elementary school or former elementary school or something, somewhere where they were housing these families, where mothers were hopefully trying to get a night's sleep, with their kids, their traumatized kids who've been traveling thousands of miles, across several countries and God knows what kind of horror to come here and hopefully get a shot at working and getting a few decent meals and a place to live, and a chance for their kids to go to school. And they got to hear that. They got to hear some mook, from Staten Island, whose own family's probably only been here 2 or 3 generations, harass them, completely ignorant of how their ancestors got harassed when they came off the boat to get here at Ellis Island, 2 miles across the water from Staten Island. Like, it's insane. The irony is insane, but that ignorance has been weaponized, right, by this huge machine that they've created on the right that feeds people poison. When the Republican Party descended into chaos this week and they kicked out Speaker McCarthy, Fox News wasn't covering that. I switched on Fox News out of curiosity, and they were talking about pirates in San Francisco. Pirates, right? And it was basically like meth heads that were stealing outboard motors off of dinghies that were attached to yachts, so they could sell them for parts. Desperate drug addicts and its problem and its crime. But the Chiron was basically like, what's safer, San Francisco or the Somali coast? Completely xenophobic, completely racist, complete ignorance and fear and horror. But that's what's being fed into the minds of the people that consume that product, and a lot of those people are older Americans, as I wrote about on my Substack. What's going to happen to this older population that's been all ginned up on fear from Fox News for decades, and now they're armed to the teeth, sitting behind their, locked doors as dementia sets in? We saw earlier this year this 15-year-old boy knocked on the door because he was lost trying to pick up his little brother, and he got shot in the head by some freaking deranged lunatic who watched Fox News all day and had too many guns, right? You weaponize these people with the poison, and there's a lot of money in it, right? If it wasn't profitable, they wouldn't be doing it. Rupert Murdoch is doing it because he makes money. His kids are carrying on his tradition because he makes money, right? Because he's stepping down. The Republican Party, they're in it because there's money in it. Donald Trump is in it because there was money and he wants to stay out of jail because now he realizes he went too far and he's going to lose all his money. So he's nervous, right? So he's got to become president again to stay out of jail. And he becomes president again. I don't know if you followed this. I've written about it on Substack. I got another piece that's coming out on it soon. But Project 2025, if you haven't heard of it, is the Heritage Foundation's basically battle plan for if Trump gets reelected, they're going to apply the Unitarian theory. And the Unitarian theory is a conservative legal argument that basically says, the president has all-encompassing power and doesn't deserve to be constrained by 3 separate branches of government. Like, he should be able to fire anybody he wants, which is not how it is now. There's worker protections, and you can't just come in there and fire a cabinet member who says, no, I'm not going to do that. It's illegal, right? So, like, in his first administration, he would try to do stuff and he would get pushed back to some extent. You know, Muslim bans, some of the more outrageous stuff. People were like, no, we can't do that. And he was pissed. He just wants to fire everybody. So the wonderful, you know, billionaire-backed Heritage Foundation, which is part of the same, you know, same kind of Federalist Society cesspool that was funded by all this, you know, dark money that came out of the kind of John Birch Society, libertarian movements, you know, co-founded obviously by Frederick Koch, the Koch brothers' father, and then Charles and David Koch at the end of the Carter era sort of poured gasoline on those fires and funded it heavily because they were scared of Jimmy Carter and his sort of progressive policies and environmental policies that would spell doom for the oil and gas industry. And I've gone into that a lot in the past on this show. I don't need to completely redo it. Happy birthday to Jimmy Carter. He turned 99 the other day. Amazing man. But my point is that wonderful society, that think tank, you know, of kind of like Brookings Institution gone bad, you know, dweeby guys from Princeton, you know, that couldn't get laid and became conservatives, you know, like Samuel Alito, for example. You know, it's all those guys getting paid money, Leonard Leo sitting behind closed doors and figuring out ways to screw over the government, right? And so the Unitarian theory, pardon me, comes out of that. And it's basically like creating a Caesar, you know, having an emperor instead of a president who has to answer to sort of separate but equal branches of government, which is what our forefathers had in mind, right? They didn't want anybody to become king again or emperor. They were trying to prevent exactly what Donald Trump is trying to become, right? And though there weren't as many guardrails as we had hoped, there was enough during his first administration that he couldn't get away with that. And they want to make sure if he comes back to power that that doesn't happen again. So they, you know, they drew up this document. It's called Project 2025. I think Salon or somebody did a deep dive on it. You can Google it and find out information or sign up for Noel's Notes on Substack. And basically on day one, they're going to fire 500,000 federal employees. And they're going to replace them with these loyalists that they're recruiting now. And there's direct quotes, like they're reaching out all over the country and they're like, leave your trades, put down your tools and come to DC and serve Trump. That's literally the quote, right? And the language is important. It's tools, right? They know who they're going for. You know, they want a carpenter or whatever who's pro-Trump to be at the Department of Interior or the EPA. You know, so it's not even just putting in a Scott Pruitt, you know, or these obviously, you know, who was the guy at Interior, you know, the guy who rode the horse to his first day at work, you know, and ripped off the people of Puerto Rico. I hated that guy so much. He's in Congress now. You have to put his name in the Ryan Zinke. But anyway, you know, it's not just going to be Scott Pruitt's and Ryan Zinke, right? The bureaucracy itself, what's left of it, will be made up of Trump loyalists. Trump supporters, guys with no previous experience in government, are going to be in charge of these agencies because their allegiances will be to Trump, and they'll divert government resources, money, to Trump and his properties, and they'll implement his policies, you know, which will serve his, you know, cronies and his benefactors. That's what happens in Russia. That's what Putin does. You know, that was the oligarch system. You let him do whatever he wants. You don't push back, and a few of those close to him will become wealthy, and the administrative state will be hobbled so that it doesn't work properly and it can't properly protect the people. And then the common folks live in fear, and you get sort of street-level thugs to be enforcers, and all of a sudden you've conquered a nation, right? That's the battle plan. That's what Trump has drawn up. You know, that's what's going down, and it's laid out in this wonky document. And it's not that wonky, but I'm trying to break it down for you. So that's sort of the theme of this podcast. And people love to disparage the bureaucracy. If you grow up in the DC area like I did, I lived outside of DC till I was 14. I went back when I was 18, and as you know, I worked on Capitol Hill as a bike messenger for the Congressional Budget Office, and I would deliver to USDA every day and Department of Interior. Back then there wasn't this was late 80s, early 90s, there wasn't the same security. So now most of the time you probably just drop a package at a mailroom and somebody signs it for. Back then you would have to take it to room 1401 Cannon office building. Like, so I would be walking in all these House office buildings on Capitol Hill and Senate buildings, the Hart, all that kind of stuff, and all the interior departments, or the agencies, right? EPA, you'd be walking in these places, and I have an immense respect for the people who've dedicated their lives to sort of working in that bureaucracy, because the Republicans have always made it a bad name, right? That's what Reagan came in and did. At the same time all these think tanks were being funded, it was that same time of like, the government's not good for you. The government's standing between you and your hard-earned money. Which is not true. Okay, you want a functioning government, and odds are most of that money you made is a result of a government program, but or some sort of oversight and infrastructure provided by a centralized federal government. Okay, our government and the bureaucracy that it runs, whatever you want to say about it, was the envy of a lot of the world. Okay, because it was a finely run machine for a long time, and it still is in many respects. But it is that way because smart people decide, you know what, I'm going to live in Greenbelt or Montgomery County, or wherever, Beltsville, and I'm going to work at the USDA. And I'm going to take what I learned in college and I'm going to apply it to this one subject, and I'm going to become an expert on this, and do what I'm told for the betterment, of this agency. And that's what people have done, for decades. And those people are punished. They punished them in the Trump administration. They were telling USDA employees from the DC area, USDA, Department of Agriculture, they had to transfer like out to Kansas or something as punishment, or retire early. That was their only choice. Maddow did a big piece on this. This was right before Trump shut down the government the first time, right before Christmas, if you remember. I believe that was 2018. Going into 19, actually. But he did the same thing to sort of punish and weed out the sort of loyalists and the experts and stuff, because they didn't want expertise. They want industry to come in and rewrite all the rules. And it breaks my heart knowing these kind of folks, because as I said, if you grew up outside of DC, you knew these kind of people, really smart people that just showed up and went to the office every day for an entire career. And you wipe those people out, you wipe out that expertise. It's the same thing as destroying antiquities in the Smithsonian. That's something our government invested in. You're paying that guy's salary over the course of a career because he's getting great at his job. And that information is going to be in that guy, and hopefully he can transfer it to, the next guy who takes over. But that's how you keep, that's how you keep a functioning agency, right? Is like each one teach one, so to speak. You have a cohesive bunch of people that have dedicated to their lives to this stuff, and to just do away with that overnight would be disastrous. In my mind, it's no different than the Taliban, blowing up ancient Buddhist statues and stuff just because they can. It's a smash and grab mentality on our federal government designed to empower one man, Donald Trump, right? And the billionaires that are backing him because they want another tax break. That's what the deal is with that. So when you see the headline Project 2025, that's what it means. 50,000 employees fired on day one. And by the way, all the other Republican candidates are parroting this talking point. Ron DeSantis used the language, I'm going to slit some throats on day one with the administrative state. It's the same ire he's directing, towards the bureaucracy, which is not a bad word, as I just explained. So to do something like that would be horrific, Imagine going into your job if you work in an office and, there's a woman who runs the payroll department and there's the guy who does receiving and accounts payable and the mailroom, and everybody was gone and nobody knew how it worked. And a bunch of new people just showed up off the bus, wearing a red hat that said MAGA, and like, I'm the new IT guy, you know. I was doing forestry last week, but, let me at that mainframe, bitches. You know, like that's the kind of chaos that they want to have happen, because they don't want a functioning government. They want to serve Donald Trump. And the fact that it's so lucrative to do that he has so many billionaire backers and they have so many plans A, B, and C to put him back in power, including RFK Jr., a complete whack job, scumbag human being from every account of everybody I know who's ever met that guy, and I've met him too. He's bad news just from a vibe. He's a total douche backstage. If you ever meet him, I met him at Carnegie Hill once, or Carnegie Hall rather. Carnegie Hill was my neighborhood is also full of rich assholes, but RFK Jr. stands out. And he's there to be a spoiler. And the rumor is now that he's got a lot of big backing from these billionaires. And I'd heard that rumor, and I was driving. I've been doing a lot of cycling from Brewster up to Pawling. It's like up to Dutchess County in New York. And I'm riding against this old rail trail, right? So it goes through the woods, and it was an old railroad track that's been shut down, and it's like peak foliage. So it's just been amazing. I was doing it every day for a week. And the town of Brewster is a town that's been, it was a working class town when I was growing up in the 80s, mostly white working class, guys with Italian and Irish last names who had contracting companies and some cops and firemen and the kind of people that, live in that sort of outer ring exurb of New York. And it's, in the last few decades, it's been populated by these hardworking Latin families that have immigrated to the United States to fit in and build lives, and they've brought a lot of great stuff to this community. And then it's also, a lot of the towny types that have stuck around, the white guys. So, it's that's a fought after demographic, right? So driving out of this town, there's a big Kennedy 2024 placard stuck in the ground, a big sign. And I'm like, there's not even Biden signs out yet. We're still over a year away from the election. We're not at the yard sign stage yet, but they already got these Kennedy signs out there. And in sort of, a purple town, if you will, that's alarming to me. And it speaks to kind of backing up that rumor that Kennedy's got big backing, Not to mention the fact he was at this fundraiser that Clapton played at in Beverly Hills and Brentwood, and Stephen Stills, my old boss, went there and got a lot of grief for that, as he should, for being an idiot and taking that picture, because he shouldn't have done it. But I promise you, Stephen Stills has done a lot of stuff for the Democratic Party. He's not an anti-vaxxer. I used to do an autism benefit with him every year called Light Up the Blues. I did the first one ever and helped him for years, do the auctions. Jack Black would host, Tom Petty. We'd have all these great artists playing it. Stephen is an old friend of Clapton's who sort of worships Clapton. He's one of those guys who still likes Clapton. And I'm sure, he played on the Crossroad Festival, which is a benefit that Eric Clapton has done for years to fund his rehab down in Antigua, which is a good cause. I got friends who went down to Crossroads. If you're a rich guy, that's a good place to go to rehab. But, or a rock star or something. But I'm not dissing it. I know that sounds, I'm in sobriety, okay? I'm not dissing that part of it. I've worked with Eric briefly. But, my point is, Stephen, was playing Crossroads later in the weekend, and he would have gotten invited to this swanky event at a Brentwood home, and Clapton was going to be there performing. So Stephen's the type like, yeah, sure, I'll go. That sounds fun. It's just down the street. He's been isolated in his house more or less for years, and he goes there and he gets taken a couple of pics. Hey, Stephen, let me get your pic. Get in there with RFK Jr. So there's my old boss with his goofy ass smile, like, and a pic that's like, no, you have no idea what's going to happen. So, a couple people tried to make the outrage go viral and stuff, but That's who Stephen is, in case you're wondering. And his wife was probably into going to that party too. You know, he's one of those guys who gets into the glitzy stuff a little bit. But anyway, he's not an enemy of the Democratic Party. RFK Jr. certainly is, right? And if Stephen had still been under my counsel, he wouldn't have been at that party if I could have stopped him in any way. But RFK Jr. is trying to do some damage to the Democratic Party, you know, and certainly Clapton helping him raise $2 million is no friend either. But Clapton's a very conflicted kind of guy. And my point is that could be very dangerous. But that's why the billionaires are backing all this stuff, right? They're not just going to leave it to one way for Trump to win. They're going to try every way they can, right? With the secretaries of states and all these red states throwing out votes and redistricting and all the kind of dirty tricks they could try. They are all going to be employed in this coming year. And we're going to be in a geopolitical, you know, quagmire. We got the war in Ukraine. It's been, you know, it'll be 2 years this February. You know, we're going to have whatever chaos and conflagration comes out of today's events, which, you know, is hopefully doesn't mean a wider kind of regional conflict, but who knows? Who knows? So you have to keep your eyes on this chaos and anything that's trying to sort of whittle away support to the Democratic Party. And to go to my earlier comments, you know, I'm not trying to diss on people in the media, but we have to learn from our mistakes. And one of the clear mistakes in 2016 was making it Trump TV all the time, right? Because it was sexy and exciting, right? And it got a lot of eyeballs on your news channel and on your newspaper. So instead of writing, you know, stories about his past financially, which they easily could have done, they ignored it. And now they're going to act like it's the greatest revelation in the world that his company was worthless and he was overinflating assets. That stuff wasn't a mystery, okay? This is not news, okay? But it feels like news and it can be packaged like news, and it gets your heart rate going. And getting that heart rate going gets those wallets open, gets those eyeballs in front of ads, you know, advertisers and stuff. And that's what they're selling. They're selling your attention. And I see that same strategy showing up in people that are trying to, you know, build their followings and build out their content, you know, and their subscription base and stuff. So they'll use a Mike Lawler clip, which I saw a lot this past week. Mike Lawler, in case you don't know, he's the congressman from my district now, New York 17. He is in office because Sean Patrick Maloney was the Democrat, and he got very arrogant, and he was a powerful guy in the Democratic Party and was over in Europe raising money with Nancy Pelosi when he should have been back home campaigning. And he also kicked out Mondaire Jones, who had that district and was very popular with his constituents. He pushed him out and tried to run, you know, tried to carve out a bigger district for himself, and he got his ass handed to him by Mike Lawler, who was backed by big business, right? I think Ron Lauder or somebody was paying for all of his signs, and there was just signage all over Westchester. Mike Lawler, right? And he was a Republican operative at the state level up in Albany, right? And was able to snatch a seat away from an incumbent Democratic congressman who'd won like 3 or 4 terms already. So, you know, that was an error, you know, and that's why the Republicans control the House now, is because in New York State we lost a couple other seats too, you know, and we were asleep at the wheel as a party, right? And now those same PACs, Democratic PACs, are retweeting this Mike Lawler guy because he's savvy, and he'll show up on CNN, and Anderson Cooper will talk to him, and he'll say something, you know, outrageous or something against Matt Gaetz or something he knows the left will use for their own messaging. He's savvy. The left is not playing savvy as well, right? So they're just falling for the trap, taking the bait, redoing the clip, you know, reshowing the clip for their own content to build their own clicks and algorithms and impressions and all these things that people use to measure their success now. And they'll make a star out of this guy, Mike Lawler. He's already essentially become a media star in the last week. His name pops up in the New York Times all the time. His name is popping up, in this feud with AOC, and she keeps taking the bait and retweeting him and calling him out. Mistake. Don't give him the oxygen, because you'll never unseat that guy now. He's going to win his next term. Okay? He's not going to get beat by Mondaire Jones, because I know his constituents. And it was a miracle we had a Democrat in that seat to begin with, because the tides are changing up here and they're turning red. New York State is not the same New York State I grew up in. That conservative attitude is poisoning the minds of folks up here. Elise Stefanik is a great example of that. Little rich kid from Albany. There's a lot of money outside of Albany. It's a state capital. She went to prep school. She went to Harvard, drove a BMW, went to work on the Hill for somebody, ran for a seat as an unknown, won, and, it was perfect timing, got in there and started kissing Trump's ass and saying outrageous things and built her brand. Matt Castelli, an ex-CIA guy, tried to run against her last election and he lost. He didn't win because she was entrenched. It's very hard to unseat somebody once they get into a position of power. And Democrats would do well to remember that, and don't give them a pocket full of the coin of the realm, which is attention these days. It's a high-profile presence on media. There's no such thing as bad news, Lauren Boebert doesn't care that she went viral for giving her, boo a hand job in the, in the theater or whatever. You know what I mean? She doesn't care. She's not going to suffer because of that. It's going to raise her game. And she's going to think, oh, the Democrats, the Democrats are attacking me. Like, there's no such thing as bad news because, the right is not ingesting the facts. They're ingesting the feelings, right? Because the feelings and the fear are what they're selling on the right. So when I see those same sort of sales policies, if you will, being employed on the left, it scares me, And that's not to say there shouldn't be like the dark Brandon accounts and the pushback stuff. And pardon me, I had another White House meeting like I had last year. I wasn't down there this time. I was talking on Zoom with some people who work there, and they're pretty savvy with their messaging, but they're up against the mainstream media who doesn't want to give him any credit ever. You saw the jobs numbers that came out yesterday, twice what had been hoped for, like 325,000 new jobs. I think they were hoping for 150,000 or something. That's miraculous, Inflation's going down, employment's going up. Good stuff considering we were on the brink of disaster, 2.5, 3 years ago. We had a shutdown economy. Dude's kicking ass on numbers. You wouldn't read about that in the newspaper, right? And even that good news, if you saw, New York Times was trying to couch it in defeat. Job numbers are up. Why this is bad news for the Fed? Like what? But that's what we're up against, So you have to be aware of that, because the media is addicted to the negative stuff too. They want to put a negative spin on it. People aren't gonna, they're less likely to pick up the paper if it's like, oh, everything's going roses, and nothing is going roses. There's plenty of bad news to report on. The irony is they ignore a lot of the really bad stuff that would be illuminating to humanize the effects of climate change alone, and to prepare people for what is ahead in terms of, climate migration. You think the immigrant problem is bad now in terms of migrants trying to get across the border? Wait until entire countries are uninhabitable, Wait till there's no water in Arizona or Texas and see where all those people end up, It's coming, Crops are failing in Europe, there's practically no olive oil, No, olive oil is a major problem, for somebody like me who uses it on everything, But, I'm making light. There's nothing funny about that. Start writing about that stuff. And it's not that they aren't. And the climate scientists are pulling their hair out because the numbers that came out for September, they came out this week, and they were beyond what anybody thought. And if you look at these charts, it gets really bad in the last 10 or 15 years. The last 2 years, it gets even worse than that. It's just like this year has just been a straight line all the way up. All of the warning signs are going off. Alarm bells are ringing everywhere, right? That's stuff to cover. You know, you could sum up the whole Trump trial at the top of every news hour for 10 minutes. You could do 10 minutes at the top of the show and then move on with more in-depth reporting that'll educate your viewership and build the empathy and humanity to empower people to know that they're not powerless, to know that they can do something about this, right? The right has some of that strategy in their aggression, right? They're sort of recruiting terrorists the same way Hamas recruited all these guys that ran across the border today in Israel and started kidnapping innocent women and shooting children, you know, and non-combatants, and holding people hostage in their homes or killing them, you know. They were recruited by, you know, an organization that did not have their best interests, but they wanted them to become a soldier and fight for a cause of economic oppression and religious superiority. Does that sound familiar? You know, does that sound like the Christo-fascism? Put down your tools and come join the movement, you know, and serve President Trump in D.C. Come to the Capitol on January 6th. It's going to be wild. That was a mob. Those were terrorists. They were trying to disrupt and attack a government because they'd been manipulated by a billionaire who's never paid taxes, who's never worked an honest day in his life, you know, who was a cheat and a scammer with every business partner he ever had, every wife he ever had he cheated on. You know, he abused prostitutes that he paid for. You know, sex workers, prostitutes, derogatory. I don't mean it that way. You know, I have a friend, as I told you, you know, who ended up in Epstein's house with him and said, no, you wouldn't believe what those men did to women. You know, he would pay money to abuse people. He's a sadistic demon who, if he grew up poor in the Bronx, he would have been dead or in jail by the time he was 21, because somebody else's dad or brother would have kicked his ass for the stuff he was doing to women early on, you know, or he would have popped his little, you know, privileged mouth off and somebody would have put him in his place. But he was a rich kid, right? So daddy kept bailing him out because daddy needed him. You know, daddy's two other sons were drunks. So he knew nothing was going to happen there. You know, Trump was at least, you know, was into speed and cocaine. He didn't like to drink because he was scared of that stuff, you know. By the way, he would still drink from time to time. That I'm a teetotaler is a myth that came from Trump that's always repeated. He's not a boozer, but when he would get bottle service back in the day when he'd go to clubs and drink a, you know, light beer or something. But he's a speed freak, you know. He likes cocaine. He likes something that makes him feel like he's in control, you know, because he saw what alcohol did to his brother, both of his brothers, you know. And Robert, by the way, died while he was in office. Trump hadn't talked to him in like 15 years. He was the town drunk up in Millbrook, which is a horse town up near me in the Hudson Valley. Trump had no, like, contact with this dude. You would never see him at The Apprentice or Celebrity Apprentice, none of that stuff. And then when he was dying of alcoholism, essentially, in Mount Sinai, and I think they might have moved him to New York Hospital, Trump went to visit, you know, in his, you know, when the guy's on his deathbed. It's like, and then brought his body, his casket, down to the White House for a photo op. Just the most, you know, disgusting behavior. And I'm not dissing on him for being, I'm a recovering alcoholic. My anniversary was just this past week again. You know, one day at a time. I put years together, and I've been very involved since I went to NIH 18 years ago. You know, that's when my recovery journey began. NIH, by the way, which would have been shut down last week had the Republicans and Trump gotten their way to shut down the government. And it could be shut down again in less than 6 weeks, right? I think the extension was 45 days or something. 45 days goes fast in the fall. It goes fast anytime, but especially this time of year. So, you know, that could be shut down again. That's NIH, National Institutes of Health. That's where they do all the medical research. That's where they advise all the other hospitals and stuff. You know, it's where Dr. Fauci was in charge. It's where they broke the genetic code. It's where they developed AZT. AZT, the, you know, the antiviral, the AIDS drug. So, you know, these guys are miracle workers. And when I was there, I was at NIAA, which is the National Institute of Alcoholism and Abuse. And I was in a 28-day program where they were going to, you know, I was part of this experimental thing where I was going to take a drug that might help with withdrawal from alcoholism, but it could have been a placebo. Nobody was going to know. It's called a double-blind protocol. And while I was there, I got to go to AA meetings and everything. So I learned about my disease, and then I was powerless. And as soon as I took the first drink, I didn't have a chance. And it was sort of my thinking, my programming, if you will. It's like you have a bug in your computer operating system, and if you go in there and redo that programming, the thing will work right, but if not, you're heading for disaster. So in those terms, I started going to meetings while I was in this rehab and learning about my disease and learning about the steps and living one day at a time. And it was like wind under my wings, and it's not easy, but it's doable for anybody. There is a solution, as they say. So I got hip to that by going to this, place of great scientific research and stuff. They basically said, hey, man, this is the only thing we've ever seen that works is this AA stuff. So 12-step stuff, just jump right in, brother. And I did. And my life's been, hasn't been the same since in a very positive way. And luckily, you don't have to go to NIH, a fancy place, to learn that. You can go into a church basement or a community hall in whatever town you're living in right now, and I guarantee you there'll be people like me sitting around that'll stick out their hand and welcome you. And you just sit down and listen, man. And when you're ready to start sharing, start sharing. And if you relate to what somebody's saying, go up to them and ask them for their phone number and use it and call them and start to be honest with another human being about what you're feeling and what you're going through. And you're going to be feeling better before you know it, crazy as it sounds, okay? So when I went to NIH, that's what I came away from. But while I was there, I saw that, I've talked about this before on the show. I was there at Christmas time, and I saw the pediatric cancer ward, this oncology ward, where these kids were given their lives to science, essentially. And I was there over the Christmas holiday. I saw their families, pushing them through the hallways and stuff. There was a common area, and you'd see a family walking their kid, and the kid's got a cap on their head because they've lost their hair, and they're in God knows what kind of treatment they're under. And one of the counselors, when I was there, when I was about to leave, said to me, he goes, look out the window, look at that pediatric cancer ward. He goes, what do you think those families would say if I were to walk into their room right now and say their child with a fatal disease could walk out of here today with that disease in full remission if they were to go to a meeting, if they were to work 12 steps, if they were to get a sponsor and call them? You think they'd trade places with you? Because let me tell you something, you both have a fatal disease. That's the only reason Congress gives us money. It has to be fatal. That's all we study here. But your disease, you can put into a temporary reprieve by going to a meeting every day, by not picking up a drink, by being honest with another human being, with taking an honest inventory of yourself and your behavior and changing it, having the balls to have a personality change. When this dude put it to me like that, I got it, and I also got the bravery in the sense of hopelessness, in the face of horror that these kids and other, and adult patients were going through at this place. So to think that facility wouldn't be allowed to take on new patients in a shutdown, because that's what happens. They lose their funding to start new protocols, right? It doesn't mean all the patients there get kicked out right away, but it means they don't bring in any new patients while the government is shut down. They don't start new experiments, new treatments, and everything they do there is experimental. Like all the stuff you're already taking out there in the world for medicine has already gone through the National Institutes of Health. And these guys were epaulets and stuff. They're part of the National Health Service. It's like they're in the Navy or something. Anyway, to think of that work, that noble work they're doing being hampered for a second because of a shutdown to appease some mob boss at his private golf club in New Jersey disgusts me. And that's what we're facing again in 6 weeks. And by the way, when Trump went to Walter Reed, that's on the same campus. It's right across the street as NIH. And if you remember, he went there. He was apparently much sicker than they let on, right? They gave him the monocloidal, experimental stuff at that point, right? Saved his life And while he was there, he would have his supporters go outside on the street, if you remember, and they would like ring bells all night long and horns and beep horns and like, yay, Donald Trump, yay, MAGA, right? All night long. That was within earshot of these cancer patients, these very sick children trying to get better, had to listen to MAGA all night so Trump's ego could be fed. You know, that's just the physical reality of that time he had. And it drove me nuts when we were living through it because I knew exactly where he was and I heard how noisy it was on TV and I couldn't imagine, you know, what it did to the patients. And knowing that that human being that was getting special treatment was making life worse, you know, for these other less fortunate souls across the street for no other reason than to feed his ego was maddening. And then to know that when he left, he wanted to wear a Superman t-shirt and rip off his shirt when he walked out of the door to show how tough he was. They talked him out of that. The compromise was the helicopter ride that Mark Burnett consulted on. Because if you remember, he got in the, you know, Marine One or whatever the helicopter's called and took a long circular approach down the Potomac at sunset. But they had follow helicopters with news cameras in it to videotape it. Burnett was always obsessed with helicopters. That's like his trademark because he was a German, I mean, he was an English like special forces guy at the beginning of his career. So he always puts helicopters in his shots. If you remember The Apprentice, there was always a helicopter in the B-roll. I've told you that story too about what Trump said in the helicopter. I'll tell you another time. My buddy was the audio guy in there and he looked down at Queens and he goes, look down there. I don't want to use the language. He said, look at all those spics, I'll use it, Muslims and N-words. That's what he said. And then he looked back at my friend who's Puerto Rican from New York and just smiled. My buddy's the audio guy sitting in the back. You know, that's who Trump is. He's like 1950s racist, right? Because he grew up like West Side Story era, 50s and 60s, where, you know, Puerto Ricans in his mind were the big threat, you know. And he used the N-word out in the open on Celebrity Apprentice. You know, you've heard me talk about that before. NBC knew that at the time. That didn't come out in the campaign. Even though I told Hillary's people about it. But anyway, so he got the, you know, helicopter ride through D.C. He essentially got to turn it into a campaign commercial. Him leaving, luckier than the million Americans who didn't get to leave their hospital bed when they got COVID. Right? Million plus since then, 400,000 or whatever on his watch at that point, perished Americans. This guy cuts a campaign commercial out of it. The Marine One lands, you know, on the ellipse or behind the White House or whatever. You all remember he got out, wheezed his fat ass up the stairs, and then ripped his mask off like he was a tough guy. And that was pretty much the end of people fighting back against COVID, right? Because that kind of kicked off the anti-mask, you know, like, you know, it was symbolic, and he knew that because he was heading into the campaign, and not wearing a mask was going to be, you know, part of the right-wing BS that they fed people. And look where we are now. Like, we're in the midst of another surge and nobody even talks about it. You go out in public, barely anybody wears a mask anymore. You can thank Donald Trump for that, you know, because wearing a mask was like, if I'm protecting a kid or an elderly person, somebody I've never met, sign me up. Give me 2 of them, you know. But anyway, so that's where we are with all that. It's all maddening stuff, you know. It's all crazy, you know. And it's always been that way in many ways. But we've never had as much chaos, as much kind of, obviously we've never been in this place before with both the environmental catastrophe and the outright anti-Semitism and fascism that is online. You know, if you're using Twitter, if you're listening to this podcast and you're on Twitter because you want to see my tweets, please don't. Like, don't. You know, consider Threads, consider not using it. You know, don't let me allow you to engage with that thing anymore, because Elon Musk is like Trump part 2. You know, he's going to be something that we're going to have to contend with in a big way for many years to come. But we got to sort of bury Trump first, electorally, you know. But so anyway, you know, I'll get into more of that stuff next time. I don't want to overburden you, but we've always been in these times. We've always had things to look forward to, and we've always had the kind of sort of artistic spiritual leadership we needed in a moment. And it's still out there. We don't have Max Roach or somebody today. We don't have Dr. King. We don't have a movement in the same way, right? Because all of the movements are individual people trying to build their brand. It's not just a ton of people marching. And we're stronger when we're together. And that's not to say there weren't climate protests. What I'm trying to specifically talk about is the online thing and how that becomes a conduit to power, even if in just a media sense. And that can be a trap. That can be dangerous, right? Because if you think you're completely fighting back by staying on Twitter and retweeting people, Elon could shut that off in a second. He could turn off Twitter 2 months before the election, next September or October, and there would be chaos. And all the Democrats would be like, everything was on Twitter. I didn't even set up a Threads account, and that's dangerous. We need the White House. You need all those political agencies that are still using Twitter, and I understand why, but you need them to start putting their eggs in another basket, because you can't trust your eggs to that dude because there's a hole in the basket, and that's not even to get into the moral stuff about why would you want to help, an anti-Semitic, fascist, Nazi-loving guy. Why would you want to help his product? There was already disinformation today. They had the talking points ready to go that the $6 billion that Biden, gave back to Iran was used in this attack. It wasn't. That money hasn't been touched yet. It's sitting in a bank account in Qatar, I believe. It's, it has international monitors. They haven't spent any of it yet. Half the money goes to Iraq anyway to rebuild some stuff there. And, that's not what is happening, but that's what Trump said, and that's what Rick Scott said, and all these other vampires in the GOP are going to use a talking point. It's also very convenient that they had that talking point ready to go. It's also convenient that Netanyahu had a kind of video shot that sort of looked a little campaign style when he's like, we're at war. He didn't look like a scared, haggard, caught by surprise guy. He looked like he knew this moment was coming. That will be revealed, and smarter people than me can figure out why there's an intelligence failure. But I don't trust Netanyahu. I certainly don't trust Trump. Netanyahu used to sleep in Jared Kushner's bed, and when he visited the Kushners back in Jersey. So they all go way back, and I'm not saying that they knew this was coming, but, Israel has the greatest intelligence agencies outside the United States, and all of them sort of failed, which is just not possible. So there will be accounting, and as I said, people will figure this out. But the point is, providing disinformation, especially if you're an elected representative like a United States senator in a time like this, that's criminal. That's aiding the terrorists. This is when you all come together as Americans. On 9/11, you didn't have that many people saying disparate things. You had Donald Trump, who was lying, who wasn't even in New York. He was at Mar-a-Lago. He was down there with another couple, and that guy since died, so you never got the true story. But Barron's or Cranes did a whole piece on it, and he flew back afterwards, but he wasn't even in New York City that day. I freaking guarantee you. But he used it for his own gain, and that's his initial response this time was, how can this help my campaign? This is Biden's fault. That's not what you say. That's not what you say as an ex-president, right? George W. Bush isn't saying that stuff. You got to stand united in the face of this terror. You don't think of, what can I get out of this, right? But that's what Trump does, and that's what the Republican Party does. Rick Scott, a guy who stole billions from Medicaid, and got a huge, settlement when he left, and then became a governor and then a senator, who's never given anything in his life, as many of these men haven't, So, and look up that thing about Trump not being in New York. It's completely true. He didn't show up until the 13th or something. It was another couple, and the other guy owned Page Six. He owned part of the Post operations, and he and his wife were down there with Melania for the weekend and stuff. And he swore by it. This was way before Trump was president. This was like, this came out like 2003 or 4 or something, and the guy since died. All these people die that Trump, that like Trump's doctor that gave him the Adderall, Harold Bornstein, died mysteriously right after January 6th. They found him dead in his home in Scarsdale. His family didn't say why. They quietly sent in an obit to the New York Times. The doctor with the crazy hair that said Trump is the most, greatest physical specimen, that Trump wrote his medical report when he was running in 2016, and that Trump, his first action as president was sending Keith Schiller and Matthew Calamari and the lawyer, I forget the Trump org lawyer, who went in, they went into this doctor's office, pushed him up against a wall, and took all of Trump's medical records. Okay? They didn't do that because Captain Valtrex had high cholesterol, I promise you, and that guy ended up dead in his house was mysterious as well. And I knew that guy's office. He was a Dr. Feelgood. He would provide pills to the ladies on Park Avenue and, Xanax heads on the Upper East Side. There's a lot of drug abuse in wealthy white communities, and it's legal, right? Because it's prescription. And if you're a rich person and you got a doctor, they'll write you a script. At least they did back in the day. But so that's who that guy was. But anyway, Trump always has these convenient deaths around him. Things always sort of break in his way. And that's something we have to be aware of, right? So don't engage with the disinformation. Don't make it easier for them to do their jobs. Don't make stars out of the bad guys. I know it's scintillating. I know it's entertaining, but we have to be very disciplined in our approach because we're in a very tumultuous, tenuous time, okay? So thank you guys. I love you. Thanks for listening. I'm sorry I haven't seen you in a while. I'll be back regularly. I was in Nantucket for a little bit, and the Substack, that's what I work pretty hard on, those articles. I wrote one about Jimmy Buffett, who I got to know, a page a day. Jimmy Buffett told me to, I was struggling as a writer. He said, a page a day, man. That's what Herman Woke told me, a page a day. Then at the end of 30 days, you got something. And he was right. And the last time I saw Jimmy was in Paris, backstage at the Olympic. No, it wasn't the last time. I saw him at Lincoln Center. But even when I saw him at Lincoln Center, a page a day. He would see me. He would just say, a page a day. What a great guy. Anyway, all right, well, I'll leave it there, okay? I love you guys. Check out the Noel Casler, Noel's Notes on Substack. You can find me on Threads. You can listen to the podcast. That's about it. I need to see you guys in person. I need to do some live shows again because, I talk to this computer screen and it goes out there and it's a number, and there's like 10,000 people that watch or listen to this every time I do it, and I don't see any of them. I don't get to talk to you. I'm looking at my own ugly face here in the computer screen. So I got to get back out there and see you guys. I got some other writing projects I've been doing too. Maybe I'll try to do some excerpts on Substack, the book kind of stuff you guys are asking for. Been doing some artwork, been doing a lot of music. Happy birthday to Tom York. Today's Tom York's birthday. My best friend, who I've never met, he did wave at me in Queens this year at their concert, and that was a happy moment. I was like, he just waved at me. Hi, Tom. So happy birthday, Tom York. I love you guys. Thanks for listening. This is the Noel Casler Podcast, episode 104. I will be back soon, I promise. Peace and take care of yourselves.